Good morning. Nice to be with you. As Marie mentioned, if you've got questions, we'd love to hear them as we're going through the presentation. If there's something you'd like to add to the conversation, that would be great as well. I've had the privilege of working with Linda over the last couple of years since I've been in the US. She's experienced rancher, just completed the certified educator training, so she's a professional certified educator with HMI. And yeah, I'm going to kick things off. I'm going to share my screen, put up a PowerPoint presentation here. Talking about, why is that? Sorry. Talking about low-cost, low-risk grazing, and I'm going to be sort of laying the foundation for Linda to speak to the material that we've got going. There are contact details. We're all after building biological capital, and generating cash flow, and how to get that balance right. This is a quote from Walt Davis, a Texan rancher, Oklahoma rancher. Biological capital is real wealth that can be generated solely with a well thought out management. And we at HMI are trying to help people understand where to start, why to start, what steps to take in the process. And this well thought out management, I think, is pretty fundamental to the whole process of holistic management. The low cost, low risk component comes in because so often we're spending money and spending effort on things with unknown outcomes. So the first concept that I would like to be thinking about is the tools that we apply and how reliably those tools return an investment. If this biological capital and this need to generate cash flow are central to the ranching operation, how do we untap that nature's capacity to flourish, to turn water and sunlight into harvestable products, and how to get the animals really performing in balance with this generating biological capital and generating cash flow. HMI, I think, has a history of, we're an environmental organization. We use grazing management to improve ecology. And I certainly bashed my head hard early on by focusing too much on trying to generate the environmental improvement and not enough on the cash flow side of things. And so investing in what doesn't cost us too much money, but yields us the longest term result is really important to consider. And that's pretty much the focus of the low cost, low risk management. I'm putting up the whole of the holistic management framework here, just to give an idea of the complexity that we aspire to deal with. I think that's one of the key components of holistic management, is that we are aspiring to deal with complexity, and giving you an orientation here by putting up the whole framework. Well, this is the complexity. These are the aspects of holistic management. And we are really looking at a very small component of the whole holistic management framework in our workshop today. The first block that I'm putting up here, the first component of the framework, is that nature functions in wholes. This concept of holism is where our potential lies to reverse the damage we've done out of trying to control nature. And spending some time understanding that might not be the best place to start the workshop. But moving on to the second component that we need to look at where our assets are, who the management team is, define that so that we're really working within the confined and manageable unit. Then looking at the importance of the holistic goal. Each of these components is part of the whole of the framework, and I'm giving you this background simply to orientate and understand that we're just talking about a small component. We're really wanting in this workshop to make sure that our investments, our decisions are based on improving ecosystem processes, not shortchanging ecosystem process as a whole. That what are we deciding, what are we working with should enhance biological community, water cycle, mineral cycle, and energy flow. And Linda's going to cover a little bit about how we can observe, we can train ourselves to read this environment and see what these low cost, low risk tools that we advocating here, how they influence how our management or application, how our application of those tools will influence these water cycle or these ecosystem processes, and having faith and refining our ability to read that. We're going to talk about just a few of these tools, mostly the application of time for plants to recover and the application of animals to get the most out of investment. Because as we started out, we after developing biological capital, and we after generating cash flow to enable us to do that. So we're going to be looking in terms of these tools mostly at rest, plant recovery, and application of animals. An essential component of the whole is managing, assuming that within this complex environment that things aren't going to go according to plan. So the necessity to monitor, if we're going to do experiments or management, making sure that we're having the desired outcome, the desired responses is really important. I'm going to skip over the last components and talk a little bit about my experience. This is a picture of my place in South Africa, our family ranch, showing you some cattle under density. And this is the basis of what we tried to achieve in South Africa. We're wanting to, with our animals, with our grazing, with our decisions and planning tools, get at this intersection of forage utilization. How much forage can we grow? How can we increase the amount of forage that we grow? How can we minimize our risk by assessing that forage and matching animal numbers accordingly? Animal performance, another essential component of this interaction, and are these decisions, the blue circle, the environmental health component, are we going in the right direction? Are these interactions giving us the checks from decisions, implementation, and then monitoring to ensure that those three things are all interacting as best as we can for the place that we're at? So the challenge here as ranchers, we gaze into the future, we're wondering, when's it going to rain? Always the first conversation if you're asking a farmer or a rancher how they're doing. How much is it going to rain? What's the price of the product we're going to get? And how is the input cost going to fluctuate? Those are lots of uncertainties. Those are our rancher problem. But if we manage and make decisions and manage the risk component here, we can really have a significant influence on outcomes. And as I said, Linda's going to get into that. But I want to show you this history The first photograph is an incredibly severe hailstorm that we had on our ranch in 2016. This was in November. I don't have a photograph at the test site or at the boundary where I'm showing you these videos of differences in management, but needless to say, we had an incredible hailstorm, huge runoff, a lot of scouring happened, and I'm showing you a fence line contrast to show you the value of the management that we did on our ranch in South Africa. This is after the hailstorm. You can see here that this is the neighbor side of the fence. Lots of bare ground on our side, also lots of bare ground, pretty pulverized environment, neither side looking particularly good. But as we move along a month and things are starting to regrow, you can see here that that's our side of the fence now moving across, looking across the neighbor. I just want to say that the neighbor is set stocked. This is wildlife only. This side is back onto our side of the property, of the fence, I mean. Quite a lot of regrowth happening. And then 2 months later, 2 months later, again, the same spot. And what is the kind of management that we're talking about here? Density, good recovery time, monitoring to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. Can you see the difference in what's happening in the color of the grass, in the amount of forage? This is the value of what we're talking about. So with that introduction, Linda, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Wayne. That was a great introduction. And just give me a moment to share my screen and get started. Like Wayne said, we really do want you to ask questions as we go along. What the heck? Trying to get all the slides. Can everyone see my slide? Yep. Okay, perfect. I am going to, I find it very distracting to see myself speaking. So yeah, I just want to share some of the tools that Wayne briefly introduced in his introduction. And I just want to say, I am a rancher myself, and when Wayne spoke about things we talk about and mentioned the rain, I kind of chuckle a little bit because we had our first almost inch of rain 2 days ago, and it had been 113 days since it rained. So and for like Wayne mentioned, for optimal environmental health, we need to manage animal density, plant recovery, and we need to make sure that we have appropriate utilization of our forage by our animals. Stock density or animal density is the most important component of time control grazing. And what that does, it concentrates the manure, which is the fertilizer, in a smaller area. It increases forage utilization by 30 to 40%. It lets livestock trample old rank grasses and small shrubs into the ground. It increases the ground cover and thus decreases evaporation and erosion. Some other benefits also from that is when we have this tighter stock of livestock, it means less predation, especially, I also have sheep, so especially with sheep and goats. And for a time management perspective, from a rancher, it does take you much less time checking on the herd since they are confined in a smaller area. and they will only be in one, sometimes two mobs. The best way to learn this is, we have found, is a safe to fail trial area. We want to keep this area very low cost and simple. We utilize current infrastructure where possible. Make it small, fence securely. Monitor area closely and remove animals while soil surface is still covered. And this safe to fail was introduced to us by Graham Hand. And I don't know if you're familiar with Graham and his work, but Graham has used this safe to fail trial in Australia and actually all across the world. And this trial just helps you maximize your grazing. It's learning in a safe environment. It's what the name says. It is a small area where it is safe to fail. Graham advises trying this on a very, like I said, small scale, and use fencing that you have available. What you do with a safe to fail trial is you graze the cattle at a ultra high stock density for a short period of time. The pictures you see is the safe to fail trial that we did a little over a year ago, and we had almost 1 million pounds per acre for about 3 hours. The picture on the right shows you what that area looked like when we came out of that after 3 hours. So after we're done with the safe to fail trial area for that one day, you start monitoring and you look at things like, when does the grass come back? Is it denser and greener than before? Is the stand more diverse? Does water infiltrate quicker or slower than across the control area? One of the first things we did was we marked the area, and with a date, we also use the coordinates for the location, just in case something knocked the fencing down. Some of the things you need to think about when you set up a safe to fail trial area is, where do you want to do it? The first trial area that we did, we set up in an area that we could not stay out of for 12 months. So we ended up abandoning that after about 3 months. I really suggest that you consider your grazing plan and do it in conjunction with your grazing plan. Figure out a spot that you can easily get into on a daily move and fence it off so the animals can not get back after you take them out at the end of the trial. And look at things like, are you looking to solve a problem? For us, we had a problem with landsleaf ragweed, which is a annual plant. It's invasive and it's not palatable to cattle. It is palatable to sheep, but we did some research and contributed our problem to low stock density. You also want to look at things like, how often do you plan to collect the data? What type of data are you going to collect? For our trial and for our learning, we took photos every 2 weeks in the trial area and the area outside the trial area where we grazed according to our grazing plan, so we could have photos of the difference. We also monitored rainfall. We wrote down the rainfall every month for 12 months, and also look at things like, how are you going to store that data? We used Dropbox for ours, but whatever works for you. Google works fine. I also used PowerPoint and just when I took pictures, just put them right on the PowerPoint presentation just to keep track of them so they didn't get lost on my phone. And, you know, write down if there's anything particular that you are looking to learn from this trial. To figure out how big of an area that you're going to set up for your safe to fail trial, it is really, really small. That's why I have the photo on the right that shows the calculations. We give each cow or each animal unit has only 3 square yards of space. And for sheep, if you're using sheep, you give them 1 square yard of space. So, for example, if you have 10 animal units times 3 square yards, each side of your safe to fail area will be 5.48 yards. So here are some of the things. And again, there's so much learning in seeing how this difference in stock density works on the ranch. And a little bit of back history on our area is we are on 36-inch average rainfall. Last year, when I did this trial, it was pretty cool in the early growing season. We had a little bit of rain, then it didn't rain for several months, kind of like this year. But you really do see a difference in those two photos. And again, some really important things to monitor is, when does the grass come back? Is it denser or greener again? Is the stand more diverse? And looking at those 2 photos on the right and the left, you're looking at what we saw in our safe to fail area. Those pictures are taken on the same date, several months into the safe to fail trial. And you can clearly see that the soil on the left side is much healthier than what we see on the right side. So there's a lot of learning from this experiment.
Linda, can I jump in there? I think it's,
of course.
I think it's just quite important to point out that Keith and Linda have been doing holistic planned grazing for a long time. So this trial is run within the existing grazing planning cycle. And part of what you're looking at here is what the difference is in upping the density from, let's call it medium high, to really, really high. Starting out in our conversations, in our learning, if you look at YouTube, lots of discussions around, well, you need to have graze 50%, or you need to graze 30% of standing material so that you get a good response. Each person's environment in reality is different. So setting up this trial, as Linda's saying here, if you graze it really hard, your recovery period you expect will be longer, but how long is that? And if you looking at how much recovery is sufficient, that's going to be part of the key learning. And the last component that I really like what Graham Hand's talking about is what's too much recovery. So if you're looking at learning, what are those key feedbacks that we often don't know? What is enough recovery after a heavy graze? What is that perfect moment with the amount of rainfall that happened to fall? And then what's too much recovery? At what point do we see a negative result of too much time? These are things that aren't talked about enough, and very difficult to get expert opinion because everyone's from a different environment, and too much recovery in a dry environment is very different from too much recovery in a much more moist environment. Just to add that, Linda.
Yes, thank you, Wayne. Is any other comments or thoughts so far? Again, would love for this to be interactive and love feedback, comments, if anyone.
And I just want to mention to folks, you don't have to just type in the chat box. Feel free to unmute yourselves as well for this one.
Thank you, Marie. Yes, feel free to jump in. So like Wayne mentioned here, is recovery period and post-grazing is the key to success of a high-density, short-duration grazing system. So what we're looking for in a fully recovered plant is that it looks like it is an ungrazed plant. So we know that we are told by experts that, for example, in our area where I am in the Kansas Flint Hills, our recovery periods are supposed to be in the fast growing season 30 to 45 days, and the slower growing season 60 to 90 days. What we found last year doing the Safe to Fail trial is that our proper recovery times were actually closer to almost 100 days. I think we decided it was about 90 days was our recovery last year, which led us to this year increase our recovery periods. And instead of doing 2 rotations in the growing season, we decided to go with 1. Like Wayne mentioned, we have grazed for a long time. My husband is a very experienced grazer. We did get some rain early in May, and the grass started growing really fast. And he was so tempted to change his plan and move faster. Thankfully, when I kept saying, well, remember the Safe to Fail trial, remember what we found out, let's just go with the plan and see what happens. What happens was, after May, it stopped raining. And when everyone else around us were running out of forage, we still had quite a bit of forage. And the picture on the right is an eastern gamma grass that we had not seen on this ranch in several years, but that is in the trial area. And we're going to talk a little bit about bunchgrass monitoring in a little bit, but it was just absolutely astounding what we learned from that Safe to Fail trial. And I really do think that if you choose to do a Safe to Fail trial, that you will learn so much from it. I know you will. There's just tremendous learning in a Safe to Fail trial, and the recovery periods, and like Wayne mentioned, what is too long, what's not enough. But seeing the perennial grasses just explode when you give that seed bank the appropriate recovery is tremendous. So another tool.
No, just going back there, can you talk about the change in yield? You did estimates inside the trial and outside the trial. What was the difference in grass yield?
Oh, yes, of course. So after the Safe to Fail trial, we increased our yield 1,500 pounds per acre in the trial area, which is like getting, if you can do that over several acres, I mean, even just a small amount of acres, 1,500 pounds per acre, you can increase your stocking rate tremendously. It's like getting an extra pasture without paying extra pasture lease. Any other comments, questions on Safe to Fail before we move on? A very quiet group. Do you have any other additions, Wayne, on Safe to Fail?
Yeah, I think a couple of things to add is that the trial is set up to really figure out recovery and density. Lots of controversy, lots of different opinions in this space. And I know for my dad and myself, I was the environmentalist and wanting to fix environment, as I pointed out, and he was the stockman and really wanting to look after stock numbers. And he was terrified of ultra high density, or very high density. The reason for trying out this trial is not that we're encouraging people to use 1 million pounds per acre. It's that we're encouraging people to try out what high density does and what the threshold is. The reason that Graham's called it a safe to fail is that we're wanting to actually see where the system breaks. Speaking to a chap from West Texas who tried really high density, he discovered at a certain time of year, too much density was really negative. If you try a small area like Linda's done, and it's not it can be a sacrifice area, a learning plot. You're learning what does this really high density do, and that gives you confidence that you don't get long-term compaction, or maybe you do, depending on your environment, if you're sandy or whatever. It's the point here is let's approach this trial as a learning experience to gain confidence. When do you get the biggest return on density? When do it influences so many of the fundamental decisions that are needed in a grazing plan that testing this out is really important. I talked about animal condition, as did Linda, being fundamental. We're not too concerned about animal condition in a trial like this. The animal condition difficulties will come in as you expand a high density situation. And let's be quite clear that ultra high density doesn't necessarily fit everyone's goal. It should be a learned progression from what you're doing now, gradually building it out to what's the optimal management for your situation. But the trial gives you a glimpse, a view at the potential of your land with density and that recovery component that needs to match. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Wayne. Any other comments, questions from anyone?
Yeah, I would like to jump in and focus a bit in the Mediterranean climate where I live, where we're predominantly dealing with annual grasslands, and that's the predominant vegetation now. And I've been doing the planned grazing on my place for the last 30 years. And while perennials are tending to increase in many areas over time, and in some significant areas, the perennials are now dominant. It's also true that there are areas where they are just not showing up, period. And my family for 4 generations had farmed this land, dry land farming, to raise oat hay. So after doing this for 30 years, I'm convinced there's just not much seed bank in there. Otherwise those plants would be showing up by now, even if I'm not using ultra high stock density grazing. My typical grazing periods during the fast growth would be 40 days. That's what I've found is the recovery I need during that fast growth. And during the long, slow growth, the bulk of our rainy season is slow growth in those winter months. And I provide 80 to 90 days recovery. So I appreciate what you're saying, Wayne, that you have to find out what works and doesn't work for your own particular situations, and that these trials can help sort through and find a better way if there is one. But I think it's also true to say that you might need to run a whole series of trials, because given all the things I've tried on my place, I have yet to see the kinds of immediate dramatic results that I'm seeing in areas that are warm season plants. All my stuff is cool season. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there for any discussion or ideas on dealing with annual grasslands where perennial seed bank is really questionable. I'm sorry.
I think Mike, sorry, I was on mute there. I think my response there is pretty much, let's see what would it be worthwhile for you to see what density does. As Linda's experience, Linda and her husband Keith's experience, they've been managing using holistic plan grazing. They've got fairly high densities like you're talking about, but as soon as they pushed that density much higher, suddenly an amazing transformation happened. And they're not the only ones that have seen this kind of response. I know Johann Zietsman talks about this. A friend of mine in Central Texas had a, let's call it a sacrifice paddock. Animals were in there in the rain. They churned it up, and suddenly, with enough recovery, seeds that haven't germinated there, haven't grown there in 100 years, started popping their heads out. There is an argument that maybe those seeds just weren't, those plants were there, they just hadn't been given enough time. But if you look at the photographs that Linda's showing here, the change is pretty transformational. It's not a small change. And you know, it brings to mind a story of Alan Savory being in Namibia with one of the, what's his name, Argo Roost, and we're walking around, and back then we had exclusion plots. So on our properties, we were putting up areas to keep animals out, to see the influence of having no animals versus our regular management. And Argo asking, well, what's going on here? And Alan's quick response was, maybe you just don't have enough density. Density is not the beginning and the end, but it is certainly part of the magic. If we don't know the parameters in our own environments, what are we missing out on? And I think what Linda's learned here is maybe not that they're going to use £1 million per acre, but if they do use much higher densities strategically, they're going to get a shift away from certain plants that they regard as low yielding, and potentially increase that carrying capacity dramatically. There's valuable learning here. And I think I am really excited by the results she and a number of other people have got from running these trials. It's not to shake up your management and try and do ultra high density necessarily. It's let's figure out what these parameters are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. And Richard, I agree with what Wayne said, and I would be interested in seeing, if you did choose to try something like this, again, these trials are performed in such small areas, which is also really important to note. It's done in an area so small that you will not miss it by leaving it out of your grazing rotation for a period of time, such as 12 months, because you can do it in an area that's like I showed 5 by 5 by 5 yards, square yards, and just see what happens if you bring those animals in and monitor it for an extended period of time. I would really be interested in seeing what happened if you tried it. Maybe nothing, like you said, but then again, we may all be surprised and see that something can come out of it.
Well, I agree with everything both of you are saying. I'm just saying, as a certified educator in holistic management who's been helping others do these safe to fail trials, we're not seeing the kinds of results that some of you other folks are seeing in the world. And
Okay.
that's-
Okay, they may not be as
it's right in
drastic.
front of my face, and I have to
Okay.
deal with that. And
Okay.
I have to find out, okay, what am I doing wrong? What is a way that will help accelerate this change the way people like you folks are seeing that
Okay.
change happen?
Okay.
Sorry, I misunderstood that. What I will add here, Richard, is that where we've done this at slow growth or no growth, we've had far less impact, far less result than where there's active growth. So I think the liquid carbon pathway component of the ultra high density is something that really needs to be thought about. If you're going to spend the time to do this trial, how fast, how aggressive was the growth? Because the more optimal the growing conditions when we put the density on, definitely much more reliable and consistently increase or bigger response in that situation. With dormants, there was little, if any, response at all, which I think is also interesting. It was I didn't think it would be that dramatic.
So that brings up a second follow-up question. If one was going to do this safe to fail trial here where I live, would you do it during that long period of slow growth, or would you wait until you've got fairly rapid biological activity in the fast growth period and then apply this ultra high stock density?
I would suggest both. The reason I say that, I'm really interested in ultra high density, not because I think it's the answer for everyone, but what are the results? And I think the interesting component here, Richard, is the guys in Mexico who are doing ultra high density are really pushing it in the dry season. They're seeing incredible results from mineral cycle later on. They backing off on ultra high density calving season in the growing season. So it kind of goes against what I'm advising or what we're seeing as when the best time to do this. It definitely makes management sense. But from a trial perspective, doing this in growing season, we're seeing that's when we're getting the response. And it's going to be really interesting to hear more about what results you've seen and what you've learned, so that we can refine this learning and refine what we're seeing and what we understanding. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you both.
And to add to that, my husband and I just bought a new farm, and we have some areas that are pretty degraded. And there's an area, we're actually doing a natural, we're doing some analysis and monitoring next week. But anyway, we found some areas that had really sandy soils, and bare ground, and prickly pear cactus is what's currently growing there. And in one of those areas, I'm planning on doing some bale grazing, high stock density bale grazing, and see what happens there. In another area, I want to do a safe to fail trial again in the beginning of the growing season, which will be in the middle of May, probably, to see what I can learn from that in those areas. So anyway, any other comments, questions on safe to fail? Nope. And hopefully we'll have some more time for discussion and questions at the end as well. Another really easy, quick and easy monitoring technique, and we do know that people do not enjoy monitoring. Bunch grass monitoring is, honestly, you can do this in 20-30 minutes, and it really helps you determine if your grazing management are moving you towards a more resilient landscape, or if it's going the opposite direction. what we do when we do the bunch grass monitoring, and I only have a couple of slides on this, and hopefully we can share the whole bunch grass monitoring protocol and examples with you in a follow-up email. But it is, you set up a transect, and you do need to mark that transect because you do want to go back to it annually and monitor the same spot. And you monitor your bunch grasses, and you want to find a bunch grass that's at least an inch in diameter. Anything less than that, or
yeah, can I interrupt just a second, Linda?
yeah.
I think just standing back from the situation a little bit, Linda did mention the reason we're doing bunch grass monitoring on the assumption that bunch grasses is what you're aiming to achieve. This is what you're managing for. In Richard's case, I think he's also managing for bunch grasses, but that's an assumption. If you were looking at some other outcome, or you've got a different kind of grass, then bunch grass monitoring wouldn't be for your situation. The other thing to talk about, as Linda also mentioned, but I wanted to make it a little clearer, is there are great monitoring procedures out there. They are excellent and comprehensive monitoring, but in speaking to ranchers, in interviewing ranchers, people on the ground, no one enjoys it, as Linda mentioned. So what can we do to make the monitoring as lead indicator, as useful, biggest bang for your buck? And this work is also part of what Graham Hand's talking about, and we've sort of worked with his ideas to come up with, if you were to do the least monitoring possible, this is what we're advocating. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit, I'm sorry. Yeah, backtracking a little bit. So you do want to set up these monitoring areas and monitor annually, and monitor plants that are, and you know, whether they're cool season or warm season, you can note that as well. But there are, you know, a lot of grasses that are bunch grasses. What you're looking for in your monitoring is that the spaces between each plant or each bunch grass, what you want to see is that space decreasing. If those spaces are decreasing, you are moving presumably in the right direction. If the spaces between the plants are increasing, then you are moving in the wrong direction. Skip that one. Another, again, sharing just some really quick and simple tools that can help you. That does not take a lot of, you know, not a lot of time, doesn't cost you any money. Wayne spoke earlier about the forage utilization and the importance of not running out of grass. So what we have here is we can use the stack method to measure available grazing. Also important in grazing is determining a green date and destocking date if you are in a drought. Determine your current and future animal grazing needs. Balance your animal numbers to the needs and availability of forage. And what we have done this year and so many others because of a drought is sell excess animals ASAP. You also can use, need to monitor your plan versus actual usage of forage. So we're only going to look at the stack method of measuring grasses today. So the stack is pretty simple, and stack stands for sole, toe, ankle, and calf. It was refined by Dick Richardson, and if you go to his website, he does have a really good video showing the process. And the HMI website also in the resources have a Excel form for this worksheet that actually calculates the measurements for you. It is, again, really, really quick. It's really accurate. I have used it, and when I first used it, I thought, this is so easy, it can't be right. I compared it to clipping and measuring and weighing and every method I could think of to measure forage, and I was within just a few pounds. So I will say that the taller, when the grass comes up towards your thighs and higher, it becomes a little less accurate, but it is a 5-minute way of measuring forage. You can do it. It's very, very useful. For example, if you know how much grass you need to feed your animals for a day, you can go into the paddock ahead of your cattle. You can do a quick evaluation, make sure there is enough forage in there. You can also do a quick evaluation after you move them on to the next paddock to see if maybe they could have stayed there a little bit longer, or maybe they stayed there a little too long and there's not as much left as you wanted to leave. So like I said, it takes just a few minutes, and you just, what do you want to do with the right or left foot? You just walk across your pasture. Try to not look down as you're doing this. You observe every 10th step. Just walk, look towards the horizon, and every 10th step, whether it's the right or left foot, look at what is on the inside of your foot. And you do this 10 times and add it up and divide by 10. So the form shows you that if it measures to your sole, you have 30 animal days per acre or hectare and 12 per acre. Toe is 60 per hectare and 24 per acre, and so on. And again, like I said, the Excel form actually calculates this for you. Just a quick example of what we're looking for. When you do this, in the photo on the left, you can see that it's going up to the sole, and it's covering the whole foot. So you write that down as sole and 12 animal days per acre. On the right, the inside of the foot is only covering a quarter of the foot, so it would be a quarter of the 12, so 3 animal days per acre. And it's not the right photo. Anyway, so you look at where it lands on the inside of your foot. And another example, just to the ankle, a third of an ankle, and to the right, you see this 3 on. Well, up to the ankle, would you measure that? Will cattle eat this grass? Another consideration that you look at when you do that is you do not measure any forage that your animals are not going to eat.
So can I just check in and ask, do you mean cow days per acre for these numbers as opposed to sheep days?
Yes, these are all, yes. So these are animal days, or like 1 animal unit, so 1,000 pounds. You're looking at animal units, right? So for sheep, you will multiply by how many sheep are in your 1,000-pound animal unit. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So to calculate your available forage, if you look at, for example, these pastures here, you take your sheet and you put in your paddock size and your calculations from your stack sheet. And if you see on the top there, this lotus was 120 acres multiplied by 22, you have 2,640 animal days per acre. And you do that across your whole farm or ranch, and you come up with your available grazing for your whole ranch. And I'm going to share an example with you. So for example, looking at, like you were asking about cow days or sheep days, we're looking at whole animal units. So for example, if you have bulls that weigh 1,600 pounds, you have, those are each 1.6 animal units. So 3 bulls at 1,600 pounds is 5 animal units. Add up, and there is a, what's the name of the worksheet I'm thinking about, Wayne? Animal production worksheet that you can track all your different animals. So calculate, add up all your animals, and we come up with a total of 171 animal units. So if you're looking at 171 animal units on your ranch, 1 animal unit is 1 stock day. So you have 171 stock days each day. From the earlier slides, we had 16,374 pounds or stock days available. And you divide that by your animal units, which means you have 96 days of grazing available. Did that make sense? It's silence.
Yeah, I think, Linda, again, if I can chime in a little, I think the reason that we're doing this is the risk part of our management is largely drought related. And I know in Texas, where I'm working a lot at the moment, we've had an extremely dry year. Forage production is way, way down. Places that usually get 34 inches have had maybe 12 or 8 or even 4 in some places. So forage production is way off, but people have waited a long, long time to destock, and that puts a huge amount of stress. Hay prices have gone crazy. And with overstocking comes environmental degradation, resource depletion. By matching available forage with animal numbers early on, you can just keep many more animals through the non-growing season. And a big problem with determining how much forage you've got, how much forage you've actually been able to produce, is how to measure it accurately. And this stack method is pretty good method to unbiased, quick. As you're out there, you can do it alone. The whole process needs refining, like any measurement process. It needs some experience, but it gives you a degree of confidence with the measurement of how much forage you've actually got on the ground. And you can translate that, as Linda's showing here, over a time period until you expect it to rain again. Make your stock reductions, and that's the point, is how can we reduce the risk in your management, reduce the costs of external forage, be more in control of your business decisions. And it comes down to forage assessment, how much do you have, and then converting that into an outcome. And the stack with this method of matching forage that you have to animal needs means that you can fairly accurately determine that, translate that to a grazing plan, and make some really critical decisions early on in the non-growing season.
Thank you, Wayne. Any other
So,
question, comments, thoughts?
so I'm wondering, how would you compare the stack method with what we learned about going out and walking a square that's big enough to feed one animal for one day and doing it that way? Those that also can be quite short and effective, particularly in regards to knowing, letting the animals tell you more directly what is it they're eating and what is it they're not eating at any particular time of year.
I mean, that's the method I used, Richard. I used squares for a long time, but again, interviewing people, too few people are actually assessing the forage at all. You need 3 or 4 people to do a square. This method means that you don't need to do that. You can do it anywhere, anytime. You don't need to do it at any particular time of the year. You can measure forage alone before you move animals and after you've moved them to see and gauge and develop your skill as a forage assessment person. The criticism I have of the squares is that you're choosing too few sites. In other words, it's not random enough. You might be choosing a good section or a poor section, whereas if you're walking a transect, as the stack method proposes, you can cover a lot more ground and still get a fairly non-biased assessment of the forage that's there. The other component is it's flexible. If you've got really big paddocks, you can do a long walk or do a number of these assessments pretty easily, much more quickly in my mind than you can the square method. Both will work, but this is trying to help people be able to do these measurements quickly, reliably, and with some confidence.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to add or say that I used the square also for a long time, and even with my husband and I doing it together, we, there's just 2 of us, so we had to use an ATV and a step-in post and run back and move the step-in post to increase or decrease our square. And it was I mean, it works, it's effective, but it's not as quick and easy as doing the stack. And I've done a square where I did a stack inside this inside the square, and I measured inside the square, and again came up with the same amount of forage from doing all 3 in the same area. So and I have also on my phone, sometime I carry my phone in my notes, decided to do a stack, and I just not necessarily remembering what toe, ankle, calf stands for, just put STAC in the notes on my phone and calculate it. You just 10 times and calculate it later. Again, they both work, and it's kind of fun to have people standing in the square visualizing if there's enough for a square bale of hay inside there and enough litter left to cover the ground. But I think the stack again is just very, very quick and accurate.
I'm one of these people that's guilty of getting used to doing something, and then, man, when you suggest something that requires change, I like the stuff I'm familiar doing. So but I appreciate your comparison. That's really helpful. Thank you.
And I agree with you. Why do you think I was out there measuring and clipping and comparing? Because I wasn't sure this new stack thing was the thing to do. So I totally get it, Richard.
And Richard, to add to your comment, I think that you're doing the measurement is fantastic. it's to try and encourage people who aren't doing squares or clipping, because I've come across, been working with people who do the clipping, and that's great. But if this is something that can add to your toolbox as something that's useful and reducing that risk of guessing or not knowing or not responding quickly enough. The big problem here is we need to get those animal numbers balanced with the amount of forage we've got. And the sooner we can do that, the more animals we'll keep through the dry season and keep them in productive condition. That's the beginning of why. Is this a good tool for you? I encourage you to have a look at the video that we've got up on our website, and if it's something you need to know more about, contact us. We'd love to share more information about the stack.
Thank you.
And Richard, maybe even if you don't want to change yourself, but maybe there's a tool you can share with someone else who want to try something new.
Definitely we'll give it a go. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So another part of our, daily monitoring, we talked a lot about monitoring our forage and our grasses, but we do really, really important every day to get used to doing animal performance monitoring. And 3 quick and easy things to look at is rumen fill, look at dung, and body condition score. Wayne, do you have before I get started, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just think stockmen are incredible. People who are really good stockmen are looking at a number of things each time they go out into the pasture or go and look at the animals. And I know my father-in-law, incredible guy, but he doesn't actually know what he's looking at. If he's out there, he's making an assessment on a number of different things because he's done it so long. He knows what's happening with the animals. If you're new to this, or if you're looking to hone your skills, what are some of the critical points to look at? And as Linda mentioned, if you're looking for what's going to affect the amount of back fat or fleshing that an animal has, the dung is a really early measurement. Before you see the animal lose weight, you're going to notice changes in dung. If you're moving animals regularly, rumen fill is really important thing to look at. Are the animals full? Are they getting enough forage? What are the other things to look at? Again, circling back to what are the lead indicators? What are the things that are the most important to look at? We highlighting rumen fill, dung condition, and then that's leading to body condition score. If you're monitoring body condition score to key time points in a production cycle, talking cows again, because that seems to be most people are working with cattle, or many people are working with cattle, so it's an easy thing to talk about. What are those key times? You don't want fat animals all the time. You don't want skinny animals all the time. They need to be at a condition at a particular time in their life cycle. They need to be really fat and flourishing before they calve, before they lamb. They need to be on a rising plan in nutrition before mating or at mating. Otherwise, the whole production cycle falls off. Monitoring to those outcomes, monitoring to those key points is essential. And these little observation points, these lead indicator monitoring points, are going to help you to hit those production key points, and that's what we're focusing on here.
Thank you, Wayne. And so just for, if you don't know what you're looking for or what we're talking about when we're talking about gut fill or rumen fill, it's really hard to show in a photo. but you're looking at the left-hand side behind the last rib, and you want that area to be nice and smooth, or maybe even a little rounded. If that area is sunken in, then that animal is not full. Other indicators that the animal's not getting enough to eat is they'll be trying to eat through the fence, or they're standing at the fence bawling at you when you show up in the pasture, wanting to be moved right away. If you come out to the pasture, one of my favorite things is to come out to a pasture and see my animals just lying down, all calm, chewing their cud. I know by their behavior often that they are getting enough to eat. So speaking of dung, so we need to look at the dung when we move our animals or around our animals, and the quality of our available forage influences the rate of passage through the digestive tract of the animal. And microbes can better digest quality feed faster than poor quality feed. So in the dormant season, hard lignified grasses slows the digestive process, and there's less available nutrients available. So there's energy, but again, the microbes can't process it without any help. So you need to supplement with protein and minerals. And also, while doing that, you need to consider the cost and the benefits of supplementation. So when we're looking at dung, I didn't have a good photo of a splattered dung. So, but you see it often in the early spring, when after the dormant season, especially. We don't have year-round growing seasons. So I guess I need to qualify that. But when you see that really splattered going through or underground, that means that it is going through the rumen too fast. The grass plants are young. Like I said, you see it in the early spring. Has a lot of nitrogen in the dung or in the grasses, and it will result in health issues for the animals. They do need some roughage, or they will be losing condition, losing weight. The photo in the middle, that's what we want to see, that perfect kind of, I had this on the other day and I said, it looks like a cheesecake. And someone said they'll never eat cheesecake again, but that's really what you're looking for. It's, they're getting good nutrition, good quality, and you just need to try to make sure that they get more of the same. They're gaining weight. On the right side, you see that stacked up, dried. Sometimes you can see the animals have a big bloated belly from that. The feed is just too low in protein or energy, and it's high in fiber, and your animal performance will usually decline when you see that, and you need to increase the protein. Wayne, anything?
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, I think backing up what Linda's talking about there, for me, it was a hugely important thing to watch when the dung condition was changing in the fall. I had two choices. You can either move the animals faster, giving them more selection, or you can supplement the protein so that the microbes can break down the material. Those are your options. Within the grazing planning context, can you do that? What are the implications? And knowing what the costs of the supplementation and the restrictions on what you can feed. A lot of people doing grass-fed, protein's expensive, but if you don't know the costs, do you destock and give them more selection, or do you bring in a supplement to add to their diets to assist them to use the forage. Notice I'm talking supplementary feed, not substitute. I think there's a lot of substitute feeding happening in the form of hay, and that's not necessarily cost effective, but it's an interesting conundrum. But part of this, what are we looking for if our animals aren't in those key conditions at a particular time of year? We're going to have massive cash flow constraints, production constraints. What are we looking at to make sure that we're getting those body condition scores, that body weight at a key point in the year? And these day-to-day monitoring points help us to achieve those goals. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Wayne. So, yeah, so Wayne touched a little bit of body condition score there and key dates. If you're running a cow-calf operation, for a cow to maintain a 365 calving interval, she has to rebreed by 82 days after calving, because 283 days gestation plus 82-day postpartum interval is 365 days. So you have a 82-day window after she calves to rebreed her. On the average, cows that calve in a body condition score 3 or 4 have difficulty rebreeding or exhibiting their first heat by 80 days after calving. However, cows that calve in body condition score 5 or 6 will go into heat about 55 days after calving. So obviously, with 55 days after calving, she will have a better opportunity to maintain that 365-day calving interval. Having said that, you also, by monitoring body condition score, you want to stay in that 5 to 6 body condition score, because if you get them too heavy, then their percentage of rebreeding goes back. And also it may not be economical to add that much supplemental forage or feed to get them to that condition. So this is the sheet that's available at the Noble Research Institute website. But this is the sheet that we use, and it's used to assess the energy or fat cover of the animal. And with cattle, fortunately, you can do it visually very, very easily. And this scoring system here is a body condition 1 to 9, with a scale of 1 being very, very thin and 9 is obese. And it actually shows you at the bottom the percentage. It's interesting that body condition 3 or 4 or 3, they only have a 56% breeding pregnancy rates. Body condition score 4, you go up to 65%, and then 5 and 6, you're at 88 and 89%. But if you get any heavier than that, actually your pregnancy rate starts declining again. So this is just some visuals for what you're looking at. I know none of you has that thin cow on the left there. That is obviously not a healthy or valuable cow. That cow is not going to resell, and she's not going to become a cow. The middle one is a moderate, and for a moderate body condition, you will usually visually be able to see the 12th and the 13th rib, and the rest of it will have a moderate fat cover. Now on the fleshy side, again, you'll have a lot of fat in the brisket and on the tail head and around the shoulders. And and I actually also put in a body condition score for sheep, and with sheep, I have found I have a Dorper cross, and for the most part, it's really hard for me to visually, unless they're too thin, it's hard to visually see their body condition. I feel like I always have to just do a just get a hold of one of them and feel their body condition. And again, this one goes from a 1 to a 5. And what you just want a nice rounded, you want to be able with firm pressure to feel the ribs, but you do need a pretty firm pressure to feel it. If you can't feel it with a pressure, then they're too fat. If you can easily feel it, they're too thin.
I don't know sheep at all. If we can go back to that, does that mean you pressing down on the spine with your thumb to feel how much rib you can feel?
I use my hand, flat hand, and feel across the back. If I can just put my hand on there and feel the spine, then they're too thin. I really want to be able to kind of push down, like a not a really hard, but a fairly firm pressure. Before I'm able to feel their spine. When I feel with my flat hand across the top. And the same, I go from the front shoulders towards the back and feel for their ribs. I don't want to be able to feel all their ribs across the side. I want to be able to barely, feel the spaces between the ribs with a firm pressure. If I can't feel with a firm pressure, if I can't feel their ribs, then they're too fat. If I can easily, with just a light pressure, if I can easily feel their ribs, then they're too thin.
Thank you.
The good thing about sheep is they are much, much easier than cattle to flush and get up into a better body condition than cattle. I mean, they're smaller animals. It takes a lot less effort to increase their body condition.
Thanks.
Just
Sure.
want to give a heads up. We have about 4 minutes left in our time.
Oh boy. Okay. Thank you for that. So, just repeating that the body condition on a cow ideally needs to be 5 or higher for her to become pregnant. And you also want to keep her in a good body condition when she calves, so she can rebreed shortly after 85 days, within 85 days of calving. Wayne?
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
good.
4 minutes, so we got to finish up. So yeah, we want to monitor the pregnant animals to make sure that they stay in good condition. And if they are going down in or losing weight, then you need to supplement their feed. And I just realized one thing that I haven't really talked about, and when I saw this picture, is also really important to monitor their drinking. I mean, you want them to just drink the water up and enjoy it. If they're not drinking properly, you probably need to check your water and make sure that your water is healthy as well. But animal performance, we're not overly concerned when we do a safe to fail. We're not looking at animal performance or body condition score. But if you are moving and trying to increase your stock density, then animal performance daily monitoring is hugely, hugely important, because as you are increasing your stock density, things can go wrong much faster than if you are on a lower stock density. So just daily monitoring is key. So the recommendations there is, if you have a grazing plan, and I hope you do, if not, then I think you should sign up for one of the grazing planning courses that HMI offers, but monitor their body condition and move based on their body condition, gut fill, and their dung. And just back to where Wayne started, what can you do better tomorrow than you did today with less cost and time? Wayne? Comments?
I think we're right on time. Maybe you have time for a question or two. Thank you very much, Linda.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Thank you, Richard.